I want to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, because it's not that well known why Belt and Road was declared. Now, anti-China pundits in the Western media absurdly claim that China's global infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative, also known as One Belt, One Road, they absurdly claim that this is part of a Chinese insidious scheme to create an empire to take over the world. That's ridiculous. That's not at all what's happening. What actually happened is that the US government has been preparing for years now for war on China, or at least a new Cold War. And this goes back actually even to the first Bush Jr. administration. And right before 9/11, George W. Bush actually had very harsh anti-China rhetoric. And it looked like before 9/11, they were preparing for a kind of anti-China focused policy. He accused the Clinton administration of being too close to China. Of course, Clinton invited China to join the World Trade Organization, which officially happened in 2001. And a lot of the neoconservatives around Bush were uncomfortable with that. If you go back and read the original statements of the Project for the New American Century, PNOC, the Bush neocons, they were really anti-China. And they saw China after the fall of the Soviet Union, they saw China as the next target. And Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader, he famously gave a speech in 1989 where he said, "I looked forward to the end of the Cold War, but it looks like a new Cold War is beginning. The US and the West are starting a new Cold War against the socialist countries and the global South." He said that in 1989. So let's not forget that in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was this idea that after the Soviet Union fell, China was the next target. But then, of course, there was 9/11, September 11th, 2001, and the US so-called war on terror, and the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, the war in Libya, the war in Syria. So the US empire was much more fixated on West Asia, and China had a little more time to continue to grow. But then when Obama came in 2009, he appointed the neoconservative hawk Hillary Clinton as the head of the State Department. And as Secretary of State, Clinton declared a pivot to Asia. And what they really meant is they want to focus resources, military resources, for a war on China, to surround China. They saw that China was growing very quickly. And in response to the US pivot to Asia, the Chinese leadership recognized that they needed to diversify their relationship. They were too dependent on the West, on their trade with the US. This was over a decade ago now. So President Xi Jinping became inside the party. He was elected the Secretary General, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China in late 2012, and then he became president of China in 2013. And right after he became president that year, he went to Kazakhstan and he announced the creation of a new Silk Road. And that eventually expanded. The new Silk Road became One Belt, One Road and the Belt and Road Initiative. And now over 100 countries all around the world, almost entirely in the global South, have joined the Belt and Road. And China has been building new infrastructure around the global South in order to prepare for the moment that we're in now. Because China could see where the direction of US foreign policy was going, and that the US was preparing to try to isolate China, preparing for war on China, and that China could no longer be so dependent on the United States as its largest trading partner. So by building the infrastructure that would be needed for global trade without the West, China was helping to build the infrastructure for a post-US world, for a multipolar world in which the global South plays a much more important role in the world economy, especially Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the three continents as they're known. And they've now become, overall together, they represent the majority of trade with China. And that trend is continuing.